Section J, Thunder Across the Sea. Well, just to remind you what we were talking about a little bit earlier, we were looking at Wilson and his views on diplomacy. And really for Wilson, he loves peace, he hates war. He also is very much anti-imperialistic, and we saw that in a couple different ways. He passes, I believe, the Jones Act, which more or less told the people of the Philippines that they would be able to regain their freedom from the United States once they kind of got their act together. So we see really Wilson hates war, very anti-imperialistic. Unfortunately for him, he is president during World War I. So we see Section J, Thunder Across the Sea. We're now kind of starting to talk about World War I. We'll finish the rest of this chapter is going to be about World War I and the next chapter as well. All right, so how does it all begin? Well, let me tell you, World War I starts in August of 1914, right? And I have to kind of give you some background of what's going on in Europe right now, okay? So in Europe, there's a big system of alliances, which meant if I were to make an alliance, I'd say, hey, if someone attacks you, it's like they're attacking me too. So I'm going to fight on your behalf if you're attacked, but if I'm attacked, that means you're going to fight on my behalf. So there's a whole bunch of different alliances uniting different countries in Europe at this time. So kind of like dominoes in the row, you know, if you knock one down, the other one's going to knock down. So there's a system of alliances in place. Okay. Also, we see a little bit of imperialism happening in Europe, probably not surprisingly. And one of these things that is happening is the country, I guess you really couldn't call it a country at this time, but the area of Serbia is controlled by the Austria-Hungarian Empire. Okay, so Austria-Hungary controls Serbia. So what happens, the spark, if you will, the first domino to be knocked down is that the heir to the Austria-Hungarian throne, his name is Archduke Franz Ferdinand, he's assassinated. He's going down to Serbia and he's visiting their capital, Sarajevo, and a Serbian nationalist or a person who wants Serbia to have their freedom again, to, you know, be free of these oppressive Austria-Hungarians, they shoot and they assassinate the heir to the, like I said, the Austria-Hungarian throne. They kill the Archduke, which is a bad thing, but this is what the case is. Now we're going to snap into those alliances that are in place. So we see kind of two distinct groups forming from this one event. We'll have the Central Powers, and then we'll have the Allied Powers. I'll talk about those, but just a little bit. So Serbia shoots the Archduke, or a Serbian nationalist shoots the Archduke. A friend of Serbia is Russia, all right? And a friend of Russia is France. So we see just with that one bullet, now Russia is up in arms alongside Serbia, and because Russia is up in arms, that causes France to be up in arms. So those three will kind of be on the same side, and those will develop into something called the Allied Powers. All right. On the other hand, Austria-Hungary has just been, their Archduke has just been assassinated. That's a very aggressive move. So now the friends of Austria-Hungary, most notably Germany, is now in war because Germany is friends with Austria-Hungary. All right, so Germany and Austria-Hungary will develop into something called the Central Powers. So we really see it's the system of alliances that cause World War I. And we see that spark being the Serbian nationalist shooting down the heir to the Austria-Hungarian throne. Once again, his name is Archduke Franz Ferdinand. All right. So I'm going to attempt a graphic via my iPad in the camera of iMovie. So this is going to be pretty trippy because you're going to be watching the internet on the internet. Wait for it. Wait for it. We'll see if this works. Okay, so here's kind of a World War I map. We see my friend, let's go up here. We see my friend France right here. We see Russia over here, and then we see the Central Powers. We can see why they're called Central, right? Because they're in between. The Central Powers, Germany, and then Austria-Hungary. Okay, right there. So here's the deal. Germany's sitting out, hanging out all pretty right there. And they're freaking out because they're surrounded, right? They're kind of like the cream of the Oreo. So we have France on this side, and then on the other side they have Russia. So Germany, their idea is, hey, we don't want to, fight a double-sided war here. So Germany's like, we're going to take one side down at a time. So Germany decides to attack France first. So Germany wants to attack France first, kick them out of the war so they can just focus on Russia. So what they do is they go up and they go through this neutral country right there. This neutral country, that's Belgium, okay? So Germany's invading France via Belgium, and here's our friend right here, England. England at this time isn't in the war, but as soon as they see German troops entering neutral Belgium, that really causes alarm. Look how close Belgium and England are. So when Germany's invading France via neutral Belgium, England joins the war on France's side, or we could say the Allied side, against the Central forces right here. Make sense? I'm glad it does. Okay. End of graphic demonstration. All right, so almost overnight, we see the European countries at war. I mentioned that. And really, Americans at this time, they are just praising the Lord that they have a sea separating them from this hot mess, which is Europe. Okay, so Section K, a precarious neutrality. Okay, so Wilson asked Americans to remain neutral in this situation in word and in deed. Okay, and both sides, the Central Powers and the Allied powers, both really want to see America enter on their side. And there's reasons for us to enter on both sides. We think of the Central Powers, we think of Germany, right? There is a boatload, no pun intended, of Germans in America, right? By 1914, there's about 11 million people that have direct lineage or direct descendants of Germans. Okay, that's about 1 in 8 Americans are more or less Germans. Okay, on the other side, the Allied forces, they got England. And England and America, remember, this was the time of patting the eagle on the head. We were really getting along with England. We had a similar culture, right? We had economic ties, also the same language. So we did have that connection with England as well. But the main idea here is really, regardless if you're for the Central Powers or if you were for the Allied powers, most Americans just wanted to stay away from this war. They wanted nothing to do with the fighting, okay? And we see, slowly over time, though, kind of this anti-German sentiment really settling in. And there's a couple reasons for that, okay? One, the leader of Germany, his name is Kaiser Wilhelm II. He really seemed to embody, the arrogant, just an arrogant autocrat, just very anti-American. So we didn't really like the German leader. Also, there was an incident where a German agent, kind of like a secret agent, accidentally left his briefcase on a New York trolley, and it was discovered that Germany had made plans for, industrial sabotage. So, we didn't like that. Also, America's trying to remain neutral in this situation, and we do not like the fact that Germany cut through neutral Belgium on the way to France. And we're like, not cool, Germany, not cool. During this time we see, like sometimes today, instead of calling them French fries, people will call them freedom fries because people don't like France for some reason. Well, something similar was happening with Germany. Instead of having sauerkraut, they would call it freedom cabbage, that sort of thing. Colleges were stopping offering, German classes or classes to learn German. Not quite yet, but we'll see a growing anti-German sentiment. just so you know. Okay, Section L, America earns blood money. So Section L is talking about the fact that America made bank by remaining neutral in World War I. So instead of having to spend a bunch of money, sending people off to war, we were making a bunch of money off of the war. Okay, and 1914, when World War I started, America was in a recession. So not a depression, not a panic, not a run on the bank, but just kind of a recession. Our economy was kind of lethargic. But once we got, war orders from France, from England, we started to make a lot of money. Our economy picked up. Also, a lot of people were loaning money to England or to the Allied powers. J.P. Morgan and Company loaned about $2.3 billion to the Allied powers. And you make money off of loans, right? So we're making bank. Yes. And Germany at this time was really ticked off because apparently America was going to stay neutral, but at the same time, we were giving all of these advantages to the Allied powers, and they were crying foul, right? They said, it's not fair that you're loaning billions of dollars to the Allied powers and trading with the Allied powers and not Germany. They had a point, but here's the deal. We totally would have traded with Germany. Would have, maybe that's not the right phrase, but we could have traded with Germany. The problem was the British Navy. The British Navy, super powerful, as it's been for hundreds of years, was blocking off Germany. So if American ships had, would attempt to unload and, have a merchant ship bring stuff over to Germany, the British Navy would more or less force American ships to divert their path and force them into British harbors. So even if we wanted to trade with Germany, the British Navy was setting up a blockade. So Germany, ticked off in retaliation to this blockade, declares, let me just read it so I'm not mumbling, but Germany in retaliation announces in February of 1915 a submarine war area around the British Isles. Okay, so a submarine is kind of new to the game when it's talking about warfare. Okay, so what Germany said is that, they would try not to sink any neutral ships, but, mistakes would likely happen, right? Okay, so Wilson, responding to this declaration of, submarine warfare around the British Isle, he, continues to claim that America is neutral, and as a neutral entity in a war, we have rights. And he strictly, and he warns Germany that they would be held strictly accountable for any American lives lost or any neutral shipping that was destroyed. All right. Okay, so let's talk about these submarines. We'll refer to the German submarines as U-boats, like a U. And they're called U-boats because that's the actual name they have in Germany. They're called in German Unterseeboot, right? An undersea boat. So a German U-boat is just another phrase that we'll use for German submarines. So Germany promising this, this new restricted war area of the seas within the first couple months of 1915, attack and sink about 90 different ships. So they mean business. Okay. The first, major crisis for the United States happens when on May 7th of 1915, the Lusitania, which is a British passenger ship, is sunk by a German U-boat. There were 1,198 who were killed, including 128 Americans. So this was a passenger ship, right? This was neutral. This was not a ship of war. So really, we're saying, Germany, you had no reason to do this. It's a big deal. We're ticked off. Germany, rightfully so perhaps, claims that this ship, the Lusitania, I'm not saying this right, Lusitania was carrying also arms, which was true. This passenger ship was actually carrying 4,200 small arms ammunition. So it was actually carrying some wartime supplies, but there's no way for them to tell this was a passenger ship. So this is a big deal. Sinking of the Lusitania. Okay. Americans were shocked. We start seeing people, especially on the east coast of America, start kind of clamoring for war. And we'll see this throughout the war. It's really the people on the east coast who are closer to Europe who are really the part of America that is pro-war. Okay. So in retaliation for the sinking of the Lusitania, what happens is Wilson writes a strongly worded protest letter to Germany, more or less protesting these actions. And we're so isolationists at this time, the Secretary of State, Bryan, actually resigns instead of signing off on this letter because he thought this letter might lead to war. So you can see how much Americans just really didn't want to go to war. Okay. Well, I shouldn't say all Americans. Our friend TR, right, Theodore Roosevelt, he's still alive and kicking. He's just plain mad because if he had been president, he would have been to war, you know, like yesterday. He was ready for war, just so you know. Okay, so the Germans are continuing to sink ships. In August of 1915, a ship called the Arabic is sunk, and this is another British liner, and this time 2 Americans are killed on this. So after the Arabic is sunk, Germans pledge, or they promise that, you know, they won't shoot until the ship is warned. So give them warning to get off the boat, that sort of thing. But it doesn't seem like Germany's holding up this pledge because a French passenger ship later on called the Sussex is torpedoed. So Germany promised after the Arabic that they would, you know, announce before they shoot that they wouldn't shoot passenger ships. And here we see the Sussex, a French passenger ship, sunk again. Okay, so now Wilson, you know, still not wanting to go war, has to retaliate. And what he does is he told the Germans that unless they stop this inhumane practice of sinking neutral ships or non-war ships, that he would break diplomatic relations with Germany. And when you're saying breaking diplomatic relations, really that's just one step away from actually declaring war. It's kind of like when a couple goes on a break before they actually split up. That's the idea. So Wilson's saying, hey, if you do this again, we're going to break diplomatic relations with you. Okay, Germany agreed. All right, Germany agreed, but now we're at this very precarious peace, right? Because we kind of gave Germany a little bit of an ultimatum. We said, if you do this again, we're more or less probably going to, maybe down the road, declare war. Because remember, Wilson doesn't want to do that, so he does give himself a little bit of wiggle room there. So the ultimatum is met, or the ultimatum is out there. Really, it's in Germany's hands. If Germany wants us to go to war, they know what to do, right? Sink another ship, we dare ya. Okay, section M. Wilson wins re-election in 1916. Okay, so even during war, there are elections. So in 1916, the Progressive Party, who's still kind of around, they meet and they nominate our friend TR. But here's the deal. Theodore Roosevelt does not accept the nomination because he hates Wilson. And he thinks, probably rightfully so, that if he runs for the Progressive Party, that he's going to just take votes away from the Republican Party and allow, once again, Wilson, you know, a clear path to victory. So TR refuses the nomination from the Progressive Party, and really with that, it's kind of the death nail, right? It's the last kind of, it's, you know, it's the end, more or less, of the Progressive Party when TR decides not to run. Okay, so Republicans actually nominate a Supreme Court justice by the name of Charles Evan Hughes. Charles Evan Hughes kind of came across a little cold. You could say kind of like a cold intellectual, kind of like Wilson. But he had been the former governor of New York, and they thought, you know, this guy's good. He's smart. He knows what's going on. And during the campaign, Charles Evan Hughes was kind of like a flip-flopper a little bit with the issue of, do you want to go to war with Germany or not? He would kind of answer that question depending on what area of the country he was in. So if he was in the East, an area that was definitely pro-war, he would sound like he's pro-war. But if he was in an area that had a lot of Germans, conveniently, he would be kind of against the war. So you couldn't really pin him down. They called him Charles Evasive Hughes instead of Charles Evan Hughes for that very reason, because he was kind of flip-flopping, right? He was being evasive. We didn't really know, did he want war or didn't he? Okay. On the flip side, Democrats, they nominate Wilson, right? Wilson's the president. They say, we're for you, Wilson. And their phrase really is, Wilson, he kept us out of war. So during this election, if you wanted to stay out of the war, you would probably vote for Wilson. And if you wanted to go to war, not that a lot of people did, but if you wanted to go to war, you'd vote for Charles Evan Hughes. That's very simplistic, but whatever. All right, so when election comes around, at first it looks like Wilson would lose because of the time zone, right? You get the results from the East Coast first. And the East Coast, you know, is pro-war. They see a ton of votes in the East for Hughes. However, as the votes start rolling in from the West and the Midwest and from California, we see actually Wilson gaining a lot more votes. So Wilson goes to bed thinking there's no way he could have won, but in the morning there's some, you know, newfound hope as these votes are rolling in. It finally comes down to California, and California does turn the tide in Wilson's favor. So we see Wilson running with the slogan, he kept us out of war, become president. You know, but just a note, during his campaign, he never said that he would not go to war. He just said that he didn't want to go to war. Okay, so with that, that's the end of chapter 29. Chapter 30 will take us through the war.